Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Association of Graduates 2019 Election Forum. We greatly appreciate your taking the time to join us tonight. My name is Steve Simon, class of 1977. I am the AOG Executive Vice President, and I will be the moderator for this discussion. The purpose of this event is to provide information on issues involving the 2019 AOG election, which will run from February 4th through noon Mountain Time on March 18th. The election will be conducted totally online. We will continue to put out information on the mechanics of the election as the opening date approaches. In addition to selecting 6 AOG Board Directors, the membership will vote on a change to the bylaws that would permit the AOG to join with the USAFA Endowment to operate with a single CEO overseeing both organizations. Each of the organizations would maintain a separate Board of Directors, and the agreement could be terminated if either organization finds that the single CEO arrangement is not working as intended. The format for tonight's event is simple. In a moment, the Association of Graduates Chair, Cathy McClain, will make her opening remarks. After that, I will pose and she will answer questions that graduates have submitted to our election email address, as well as those you asked using the Zoom application during the evening. Jeff Holmquist, our Communications Director, will be monitoring that aspect of the program and will select representative questions from our audience. I would now like to introduce the Chair of the Association of Graduates, Colonel Retired Cathy McClain, class of 1982. Cathy?
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate that. So for those of you who know me, you know I'm not local here in Colorado Springs. I actually live in Kansas. So I woke up there this morning and I got to enjoy the remnants of the snowstorm that hit over the weekend. And we had the snow on the lawns and on the trees, and I dashed to the airport and flew to Denver, jumped in the rental car, and I'm driving to USAFA. And as I get closer, I'm marveling at the beautiful fields covered in snow here and the majestic mountains with the snow on the mountains. You can see Pikes Peak, and then I see the spires of our chapel nestled right there against the mountains. And I had 2 thoughts. The first was, what an incredible institution we have here. And the second was, Cathy, you're not in Kansas anymore. So with that, let's get on to why you're paying attention to this broadcast tonight. I'd like to talk about the upcoming election, as Steve just introduced. As you know, we're proposing a bylaw change to remove the word full-time from our bylaws. That's the change. And what that will do is have the sentence read, the CEO will be not a full-time employee of the AOG, but an employee of the AOG. So let's get into some of the details. Why would we do this? To have greater impact. Your AOG and your endowment want to have a greater impact. And you ask, greater impact in what areas? Well, here they are. It's our mission. Here our mission at the AOG is to enhance the cadet experiences and their development. It's to connect the graduates with each other through the services we provide. And it's to document our heritage and our traditions created by our graduates who have had selfless and heroic acts. What will it take to get there? First, it's going to take a willingness to step in this new strategic direction, and that's what this election is about. Are the members willing? Do the members want us to take this new strategic direction? It's also going to create greater synergy once we take that step. And then to have greater impact, it's also going to require more robust philanthropy. How do we stack up? Not well. Take a look at this chart and you can see how West Point and Annapolis compare to us at the very bottom, 14%. So this is a snapshot of alumni who donated something, provided something in the year 2017, and you can see the Air Force Academy is at 14%. So why is that? We have about the same number of living graduates. So what else could be different? Well, let's look at how are they organized and how are we organized. First, let's take a look at West Point. And starting from the bottom, you see that communications, the alumni functions, and the development feed up to one CEO who reports to one board. And all of the work they do supports West Point. Now let's take a look at the Annapolis Model. And you will see that they, starting from the bottom again, the CEO reports to 2 boards, one for alumni function and the other for development function. And together, they provide their impact to Annapolis. Now let's take a look at what we look like here at the Air Force Academy. I know this looks busy, but let me talk you through it from the bottom. You can see from the bottom that we have the endowment reporting to a board, and the AOG reporting to a board, and the Falcon Foundation reporting to a board, ARDI, AFAC, the Friends of the Library, and the Air Force Academy Foundation, all reporting to separate boards. What we are proposing with this bylaw change is to move to this. Look in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, and you'll see that we have the endowment and the AOG, a CEO leading it, but the arrow is going down from the board. So the CEO is taking direction from the two different boards. This is very similar to the Navy model. Let's take a more detailed look at what that would look like for us. You see at the top, you have your board of directors, both for the AOG and the endowment, going down to the single CEO, and in the middle, you see 4 joint committees. Members from both the AOG and the endowment serving on these committees for things such as finance, strategic planning, resolution. And then that single CEO leading the 2 different staffs. Describing how we would work together in this is our single CEO agreement. And for those of you that haven't read every line of all 10 pages of the single CEO agreement, let me talk you through some of this. So for instance, key points in the agreement, I want to start with purpose, and I want to read you the first line. The AOG and the endowment exist to provide support to the United States Air Force Academy, cadets, and graduates. I read that one because it's most important. Why do we exist? And you can tell that the AOG and the endowment are completely on board on why we exist. As you go through the rest of the 10 pages, you'll get to see that we have shared objectives, shared vision, shared mission. Governance is addressed. In this construct, the AOG has a strategic governance process. That means we set the caveat of where we want to go, we tell the CEO what he or she cannot do, and then the CEO leads their staff. The endowment has a different set of bylaws and a different governance. And the structure, we will keep our separate governance processes for those boards to continue operating, and it is addressed in our agreement. The agreement also talks about CEO selection, pay, and how to remove them if we had to do that. It talks about what their duties will be. This agreement also addresses issue resolution and the tiered process of how issues will indeed be resolved. And worst case, if this single CEO doesn't provide the benefits we thought it would provide, then either side can terminate the agreement. So what are the pros and cons? Pros, a unified voice. What happens when you have a unified voice? You have more robust philanthropy. And that circles back to what I said will be one of the impact points that we need to happen so that we can have a greater impact on our AOG's 3 mission areas, which is Academy, graduates, and our heritage. Another pro, reducing the inefficiencies and the operational confusion, resulting in cost savings. Do we know what those cost savings are? Not yet, because in the agreement we specify that the CEO would come in, analyze the staffs, make decisions on what changes to make, and the CEO must do this in the first 6 months on the job, recommend those changes to the boards, both of them, and then move forward to create those efficiencies. That is an expectation that the single CEO will indeed create these efficiencies. And the other pro is it builds on the MOUs that have been in effect since 2010, which are only a partial solution. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Memorandum of Understanding, it's a financial Memorandum of Understanding. Why do we have those? Because when the AOG and the endowment were 2 separate organizations, for a couple of years, we were both fundraising. And then on January 1st of 2010, the first MOU went into effect, which said the endowment will fundraise and the AOG will friend raise and focus on that. Well, then that was loss of a funding stream. The Memorandum of Understanding addresses that with the endowment providing funds to the AOG to compensate for the loss of that fundraising stream. Are there cons? You bet. Some of it's uncharted territory. Many folks have said 2 boards, 2 masters, that's too complicated. You can't serve 2 masters. Will that be different? Will that be challenging? Yes. And Navy's been doing it for many years. Another one, would there be potential favoritism by the CEO toward the AOG or toward the endowment? Maybe. The good thing is the single CEO agreement has very specific rules of how we're going to operate together and how that CEO must operate to prevent that. Another one is that the endowment wouldn't adequately support the AOG, and this ties slightly into the favoritism. Again, 10 pages of a single CEO agreement goes into depth trying to forecast forward how to best work together so this doesn't happen. But I do want to address that we don't know everything, and so there are cons to this agreement. Is it perfect? No. A strong foundation? Absolutely, and it is worthy of your consideration. Establishing the single CEO over the AOG endowment just copies what our West Point and Annapolis sisters have done. They broke the code, and it's working. They get more of their alumni participating than we do. So as we look at why is that, organization seems to be one of the key differences. It's up to you, the members, now. It's fine for the board to go, this is absolutely what we think should happen. This is the way we need to move forward. It's not our call. Since this is a bylaw change, it's your call. I'd like you to read the source documents on the webpage, be familiar with it. I'd like you to make your decision for or against. And then I would really like for you to tell us on the board what you think by actually voting. I know there's a movement out there telling people not to vote so we won't hit the 25% quorum. That's not a very democratic process. We've put a lot of years into this, a lot of time and effort and thought. Please take the time to tell us what you think by voting for or against this bylaw change. We want to go for the greater impact. The greater impact for cadets, greater impact for you, and a greater impact on documenting our legacy going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy, and thank you so much to the graduates who provided these great questions. We'll get started with the first one. Both Gary Palmer, class of 66, and Dennis Maddow, class of 64, asked a similar question, so I've kind of mashed it into one. Dennis writes, about 10 years ago, some well-connected and respected classmates encouraged us at an all-hands during a reunion to split the endowment off from the AOG. I find it curious that something that was such a great idea a few years ago is now out of favor. And then the two of them ask, why does partially merging the organizations now make sense? What changed? Does this not violate the intent, the spirit of that arrangement?
Good question. What's changed in those intervening years since 2009? Well, I will say for one, is that the environment and the trust between the two organizations has blossomed. The endowment has also changed its fundraising perspective, and it now supports programs which support the academy done by nonprofits. We're a nonprofit. Falcon Foundation's a nonprofit. ARDI's a nonprofit. So all of our missions here as the AOG, the three I talked about, support the academy. So that has also changed. The endowment is now supporting all of our 3 mission areas.
Next, Wayne Miracle, class of 1973, had several questions. Let me ask you 3. I'll ask them one at a time. 3 missions are stated for the AOG, while the USAFA Endowment appears to have 1. Mm-hmm. What is the #1 priority of the Association of Graduates?
So again, the 3, supporting the academy, the cadets, enhancing their experience, connecting our graduates through the services we offer, and also documenting our heritage and tradition. I will say that 2 are the #1, and it's the supporting the cadet experiences and increasing the margin of excellence for their training and development, and also the graduates. Those, I would say, are both 1. Unfortunately, heritage and tradition takes a slight back seat to that right now. We would like to change that in the future, but right now I'd say we have 2 #1s that are neck and neck.
Wayne also asks, do individual AOG members have any available vehicle to impact USAFA endowment decisions?
Well, sure. The endowment is made up of AOG members. And so those individual AOG members absolutely can impact what's going on over at the endowment.
And finally from Wayne, is there any way members could see side-by-side comparisons for AOG and UE fundraising results during the last 10 years?
So I'll remind you that the AOG has not been involved in fundraising since January 1st of 2010. So I'll remind you of that first, but I'll also say, and here's where you can go look at some information. So if you go to the AOG website, /endowment/finances, you can see the information you're asking for. You can also see the AOG side of it. Again, the AOG website /AOG/finances, and you can see all of the information there too.
The next question is also a mashup because we are getting some questions that are very similar. This from Dan Vissian, class of 1972, and Green Gaylord, class of 64. There are budgets and employees for the AOG and the USAFA endowment. Is there a projected reduction in costs, potential savings by combining the two organizations, and if so, how much?
We expect there to be a savings on it, and as I'd mentioned earlier, we're leaving that up to the CEO, who is charged in the agreement in the first 6 months to analyze the staffs and decide where those synergies can be achieved. Can I answer the detail of how much? I can't, because we're going to let the CEO make that decision and bring it to the boards.
One more question that came in before, and then we'll actually go to a couple from our online participants. Roy Miller, class of 1967, asks, since our CEO is now responsive to the elected board, why would we want him or her responsive to an unelected board like the USAFA Endowment, especially when that one holds the purse strings?
Because that creates the synergy. Having the single CEO being intimately involved with the AOG and intimately involved with the endowment, knowing what we need to do to move forward is actually the right decision. And it mirrors history at Annapolis. We know it works.
Again, 2 questions from online participants, and I'm going to ask these, again, there's some overlap here. Johnny Whitaker asks, is there a proposed timeline for the total merger of the AOG and the endowment into a single organization with a single board and a single CEO, while C.K. Dexter Haven, call sign, asks, why not one CEO and one board? How does that improve fundraising?
Super. So is there a timeline? No, there's not a timeline. As you see in the single CEO agreement, though, we talk about continued efficiencies. Could we end up at the West Point model? Sure. Could we stay at the Navy model? Yes, we could. Could we go to something like the VMI model? Your board and the staff have been looking at all of those as we make this decision on where to take this very first step. So we want to take this very first step and iron out wrinkles that will occur before we take the next step. One of those we need to work out is governance. Like I mentioned before, we have different governance policies, and if we're going to make another step to even greater unity, we need to iron out and have common governance. That's a thoughtful process to go through, and we don't want to rush that. So that's my answer as well on why don't we just jump to it right away and merge it. We feel it's best to make the small step first, iron out wrinkles, and then look at what should the next step be.
Dan Vissian, class of 72, and Ed Kraft of class of 1987, both ask again a similar question. The $800,000 endowment payment to the AOG seems to be a large amount of money. Its use is not particularly clear. Can you please explain how the funds are allocated?
Certainly. So the $800,000, I just want to lay some background on that. So when the AOG works their budget, we take some money from the spinoff of our investments, as every nonprofit does. Some money, then the $800,000, is an infusion from the endowment for us to do our job. So when we do our job for the cadets, that's a margin of excellence. Those are the programs like Soaring and the clubs and the Cadet Leadership Enrichment Seminar, all of those things that don't get DoD dollars, but enrich the development and the training for the cadets so they become even stronger leaders. That's what the money goes for, because that money funds the staff and funds all of the programs. That's the result of that money.
A somewhat related question from Johnny Whitaker, class of 1973. If AOG members vote no on the single CEO proposal and the AOG and endowment remain structured as they currently are, is the AOG guaranteed to be fully funded annually by the endowment?
So you might have seen that we just recently signed a new memorandum of understanding. Remember, that's a financial memorandum of understanding in December, and it lasts for 2 years. The AOG asked for $800,000 each of those years, and the endowment said, you bet. So yes, we are fully funded, and we want that 2-year window as we move forward into this single CEO structure, if the members give us permission to do so, so that we have that guarantee as we find a single CEO and as the CEO is looking at the staffs and we start making that move to synergy. So that 2-year financial memorandum of understanding gives us that guarantee while we're making a change.
Johnny Whitaker's 73 classmate Bob Munson also has a question. In previous versions of the single CEO agreement, the AOG was guaranteed an annual grant from its partner, the endowment, that ensured the AOG would not have to dip into savings to support the partnership as it is doing now. Why was the financial guarantee removed from the current agreement?
So let me first correct an inaccuracy in that the AOG is not dipping into savings. The AOG has what we call a reserve. It's roughly $2.75 million that we do not touch. It's there in case of an emergency, a huge market crash. So let me correct that one. As I said before, the AOG pulls some funds off of the spinoff of our investments. So the second question was, why was that guarantee removed? We did have phrasing in a version of the single CEO agreement that had guaranteed amounts. And as our treasurer on our board asked some questions about that and wondered about bull and bear markets and what's fair and right for both organizations, we came to the agreement to instead change the paragraph to what it says existing agreements now instead, so that it's prosperous for both organizations.
Looking back online, one of our participants, Angus McDonald, asks, what qualifications will a selection panel be looking for in a new CEO?
So qualifications are going to use an executive search committee. The AOG and the endowment, if given permission to move forward with this, will come up with a list of requirements, required attributes, desired attributes. We'll form a small team to scale down the number of candidates, bring them in and interview them. And at that point, we would move forward. So what are the requirements? I want to talk to you about what requirements we have in the single CEO agreement for this CEO. In paragraph 3, the CEO will, and we're talking about what they're going to need to be capable of doing. Increase efficiency, effectiveness, and continue to improve on aligning fundraising and alumni operations. Improve staff collaboration. Present a single face to the Academy, cadets, graduates, members, donors, and friends of the Academy, and enhance the long-term financial security by increasing donations to both the AOG and the endowment. So we're going to look for a CEO that has capability and experience in those areas to make that come about.
Pat McAdoo, class of 64, has a question about quorum. Will we have a separate ballot for the proposed bylaw change versus the basic director vote? I raise the issue due to some grads recommending abstaining in order to prevent a minority of grads from affirming the single CEO.
Yeah, that's unfortunate that some grads are recommending abstaining versus just having people make their decision for and against and telling your board what they want. Will we have a separate ballot? No. That's not our precedence on having a separate ballot. We've had elections in 05, 11, and 17, and now 19 that have followed that precedence. The years I just mentioned all had candidates and bylaw changes on the same ballot. There's no reason to change that now.
Jack, Buck Buchanan with a couple related questions on quorum. We've already voted on this issue, asked and answered, but we had a quorum problem. It is a sad state of affairs when we couldn't muster 25%. Has West Point or Annapolis faced this situation?
I agree. It is a sad state when 25% of us don't click on the link in the ballot and vote. Have West Point and Annapolis had this situation? West Point, I was surprised to learn, only requires 500 members to vote to have a bylaw change. We require 25%. For us, that's 7,400 members need to vote to achieve the quorum, as opposed to West Point. So West Point, no, they don't have a problem.
One more forum question from Buck Buchanan, class of 72. Have we considered a more flexible quorum for a successful election? He offers a couple of suggestions. Fix it by bylaw change, or just have the board of directors decide if the results were acceptable.
Oh, okay, I'm going to cover that one at first. Our bylaws require 25% quorum. It is not in the purview of the board to disregard that. So no, even if we overwhelmingly have votes in favor of single CEO and we don't have the 25% quorum, we will not move forward with that. Have we thought about changing the 25%? Yes, numerous conversations on that. For folks in the nonprofit realm, getting anywhere between 10 to 15% of the members to vote is about the sweet spot. 25% is a very high bar to set. To change it, we need to have another bylaw change. And to do that, we'd have to have 25% of the people vote to take our quorum percentage down to something else. I hope that we would be able to put something more realistic in the 10 to 15% range in the future.
Zoom viewer Tammy asks, doesn't the endowment cover fundraising for many of the nonprofits associated with USAFA, Falcon Foundation, and others listed on the previous slide? How will this affect those other nonprofits?
I mentioned that the endowment had changed their fundraising concept, and I'm going to emphasize that one again, that the endowment fundraises for programs which support the academy, and for, if other nonprofits have programs that support the academy, they are covered by that. So yes, the endowment right now is asking the Falcon Foundation, what do you need to do your mission? And Artie, what do you need? And Friends of the Library, what do you need? So the change for them shouldn't be a change for them. What this will do for us is just give us, the two larger organizations, the AOG and the endowment, the synergy to have that single voice and that unity so that we can have more robust philanthropy.
Turning now to the Red Team report, we received input from several graduates, including Bruce Golson and Keith Heitzman from 73, Tim Kelly, and I'm going to read a question that Pat Garvey, class of 1972, asked. Please provide some background on the Red Team report that was conducted, who sat on the Red Team, and what were the conclusions of the Red Team? How were the recommendations of the Red Team addressed? So a Red Team, as you all know, is a purposely negative report trying to pick apart everything you can find in it so that in a negotiation setting, we, the AOG, want to make sure that we didn't miss anything or we wouldn't hurt our AOG. When the Red Team took a look at the single CEO agreement back in the year 2016, the folks on the board was a previous board chair, a non-director secretary, and 2 board members. One of those board members is still on our board today. When they analyzed the report, it was discussed in closed executive session. We also talked finances in that. This is one of the few cases where our bylaws specifically allow us to have discussions in executive session, and we did, and they were frank discussions. At the end of that discussion, the board had to decide whether we wanted to move forward in 2016 with a single CEO agreement. It was unanimous to proceed forward at that time, to include the 2 directors that were on the Red Team.
I say that to put it in context of what were the concerns of the 15 board members. And you ask, what have we done to mitigate that? If you look at the frequently asked questions on our website, they are up there, but let me just cover a few for you. So one of the concerns was that AOG efficiency and effectiveness would suffer under a single CEO. We think it would actually be better under a single CEO when you have that one person looking at the staff and integrating the staff and have that one voice and one vision. We don't agree with that. The evaluation raised a concern that members of the AOG staff believed the provisions of the single CEO agreement would be unworkable. The CEO of the AOG at that time, back in 2016, was not supportive of the single CEO agreement because he was very concerned about the different governance policies between the two organizations. As I say again, Navy was the exact same situation. Now, Navy has worked to make their governance common, but then they stepped into it, it was not. The evaluation raised a concern that having 4 joint committees will add to the CEO's burden, and the budget and dispute resolution process will make decision-making harder and time-consuming. We disagree. We think the joint committees actually streamline things. If both organizations have a seat at the table and are talking finance and strategic planning, then that just makes it easier for the CEO. There's several other questions on the frequently asked question page. I encourage you to click on that and take a look at them.
We're getting some great questions from the Zoom participants, several in fact discussing West Point and Annapolis and how that relates to the Air Force Academy. Marty McNabb, I'm going to read his question, but also acknowledge Paul, Jeremy Johnson, and Leon for some great questions. Marty asks, we seem to be directly correlating Navy's board structure and their graduate level of participation percentage. How do we make the leap of conflating board structure and percentage of graduate participation? Do we anticipate a similar increase in participation, and why?
Good question. As we try to figure out why is our percentage down at 14% of members giving back financially to their institution compared to West Point and to Navy, we look at that and ask, well, what are the differences between the two of us? And so do they have more graduates? Well, no. We're about the same number of living graduates. Do they have a longer history? Well, yes, they do, and we can't impact that. Are they organized differently? Yeah. So as we try to figure out how do we mirror their success, organization was a key factor. They're doing it very differently than we are, and that's why we want to launch out on this effort to have a single CEO. L. Parker Temple of class of 71. Why did 2 organizations established for good and proper reason separately somehow become so well aligned that it now makes sense to combine them? Because a lot has changed since 2007. The Endowment and the AOG occupy the same building here in Doolittle Hall. In fact, the Falcon Foundation is here in Doolittle Hall as well. So when you work in the same building and see each other and run back and forth in the hall and talk, that synergy and that trust increases. Boards have changed. Leaders of boards have changed. Directors have changed. And we've taken the time to get to know each other and trust each other and really have a common understanding of it's not us versus them. It's we and what can we give back. And that's the overriding purpose of what we want to do. L. Parker Temple also asks, what are the issues that might indicate that this is not a good idea? What is the downside of combining the CEO functions? So the downside, we don't really know as we step into it what might happen. Now we know from Navy and Annapolis and VMI, we spent time with all of them figuring out what they do, what lessons learned they had, but until we step into it, a pitfall will be, we don't know until we get there. You know, a flight plan is as good as first contact with the weather, and then we adjust and move from there. But thankfully, we have a good example to follow from Annapolis Model particularly. Other pitfalls I talked about in the briefing slide, that 2 masters, 2 boards, people worry about that. Favoritism potentially, and the endowment not being able to truly support the AOG on what we need to do in our 3 mission areas. Are those pitfalls? Could be. And we need to go into it and see how we can mitigate those.
Zoom attendee owner asks, how will the single CEO be evaluated to verify that the process is actually working? What criteria will make up that evaluation?
So the AOG and the endowment, again, will sit down together and draw up exactly how that will be evaluated. Just as we do now in the AOG, we have very objective ratings for our CEO, and we have subjective ratings for our CEO. I expect that to be a path we would follow as well as we have a single CEO. But we need to sit down and write those out so that CEO knows exactly how they're going to be graded by the AOG board and by the endowment board.
You've touched on this before, but I'd like to maybe, this is a little bit different question asked by Craig Hancock, class of 1996. It's been stated that the single CEO is an interim step towards some other end state, yet that end state has not been made clear. Can you help us understand what that desired end state is so we can put this single CEO idea in context of the larger goal? Yeah.
So those words are also used at the beginning of the single CEO agreement or out as we have first step. Do we know what the next step's going to be? Not yet. We want to see what this first step looks like and how successful this first step is for us in the AOG for achieving our mission areas and having more impact. For the endowment, being able to have more robust philanthropy that serves all of us. Could it be the West Point model? It might be in the end. At this point, we don't want to dictate it because just as things have changed from 2007 when we had an endowment and an AOG, things are going to change over the next few years as well, and we want to respond to the environment that we're in.
Jonathan Boyd asks, what were the problems in 2007 that caused the split between the AOG and the endowment, and have those problems been fixed since that time?
So I understand that the issue had to do with wanting more control from the members being able to elect folks to the board versus appointed. So things that have happened since then, the AOG created bylaws, continued with elections. So as I talk about what happened back then, I will also tell you I hear a lot of different versions of what happened back then from many different people. And I know there are scars, serious scars on some folks about what happened. But the bottom line is there was some distrust. There was unhappiness with the way the board was populated, and that led to the separation and to the state we are in today.
We received an email from Fred Smith, his comment. The word synergy is used repeatedly in the FAQs. Please point to at least one specific set of decisions made under the current 2-CEO model that would be made differently because of the single CEO synergy.
Well, you know, I mentioned we just had the new MOU signed in December, and that took several months of chatting and talking and sharing budgets and being very open. If there had been a single CEO, that might have taken just a few days.
We've got a follow-on question from C.K. Dexter Haven. Please define more robust philanthropy.
Something much greater than 14% of us participating. So as we look at our sister services, we know it's possible. So how do we get there? So defining that more robust philanthropy is increasing those of us who donate. Some can donate a small amount, some can donate a large amount. Some want to donate with their services. They want to show up out here in Jacks Valley and be the briefers or stand here and watch the cadets go over the bridge. Many different ways to serve financial philanthropy is something a whole lot more than 14% of us giving back that way.
Our current CEO, Marty Marcolanco, getting some love from one of his classmates. Tom Sadlow asks, what happens to Marty?
And I will say, what happens to Mike? We don't know at this point. Marty has done a phenomenal job for our AOG and is under a 2-year contract with us. In his contract, we actually have a caveat in it that if we moved to a single CEO in his 2-year contract, he has the option to become the COO for the AOG and finish out his contract.
Bees Kellenbent's class of 78 asks, wouldn't it make sense to have a single COO? One CEO for both organizations should not have to deal with internal staff or operating issues. A single COO, in addition to the CEO, would allow that person to work the management issues for both organizations.
And Bees, that may be something the single CEO says there's a need for. Right now, the AOG does not have a COO, and neither does the endowment. There are people on the staffs that do those duties, but maybe that will be one of the alignment features the single CEO would look at and suggest.
Roy Miller, online participant, asks, the AOG board allows grads to participate. The USAFA Endowment does not. Why would we want to move toward less transparency?
The AOG board allows grads to participate. Roy, from my conversations with you before, I'm wondering what you mean by participate. The AOG board absolutely allows members to be here in person and watch board proceedings. I know you and I have had conversations about your desire to dial in virtually and listen. The bylaws clearly say you can be here in person and attend the board meetings. And as for the endowment, they have a different set of bylaws. So you get a single CEO, starts looking at staffs. You have 2 boards that look at what do we need to do with our governance. Do we need to stay separate? Do we need to align? All great questions that are in front of us.
Jim Barr, class of 1972, asks, should former superintendents and commandants be allowed to serve as CEOs, considering the influence their academy time might have on their independence from the academy?
Well, our bylaws say that the CEO must be a non-active duty graduate, and that's it. So that would include those folks. As for the question on should they be, I guess I would ask that back to you. Our members say that the CEO simply just has to be a non-active duty graduate.
Johnny Whitaker, class of 1973. I thought the USAFA Endowment was the only authorized fundraising organization for the Academy. Doesn't the Air Force Academy Athletic Corporation also raise funds via the Falcon Pride Club and other activities? If the Athletic Corporation is raising funds for athletics, why does the endowment also raise funds for athletics? For example, Falcon Stadium renovation and the indoor practice facility.
Okay, so first let me clarify that the endowment is not the only authorized fundraiser. When we talk about the difference between the AOG and the endowment, the AOG does not fundraise. Remember, we were stepping on each other for a couple of years in fundraising, the 2007 through January 1st, 2010, where we divided the duties. Other organizations, remember all those nonprofits I showed in the beginning in my presentation, Friends of the Library fundraises, Falcon Foundation fundraises, RD fundraises, all of them fundraise. Now back to your specific question on athletics, the AFAC is raising money for things that touch athletics, and the endowment raises money for things that can touch athletics, just like the endowment is raising money for the AOG and for the Friends of the Library and for RD. So there's overlap, and as long as we're not raising money for the exact same thing, that would be good.
Zoom participant John, to increase participation, has the AOG and endowment considered publishing a detailed list of projects they support each year? The current annual report only provides a top-level summary and is insufficient.
Can you bring up the slide for me at the very bottom? John, there's a single page that's on the election website, and it shows many things that your AOG supports, and the folks can see it now. So it's there. It's also on the web page, the election web page, if you want to click on it as well and see that. So perhaps this will give you a little bit better feel of all of the things your AOG gives back in those 3 mission areas.
Marty McNabb, 86, back with us with another question. If we go to a single CEO and the percentage of participation doesn't increase, will we reassess, and over what time span?
As we set forth the requirements of the CEO, those objective requirements that CEO must accomplish, as we then grade him or her on performance, that will be a key one. And would we reassess? Yes, we can reassess. Absolutely. We can reassess all the way to the point of saying, this doesn't work for the Air Force Academy. We know it works for Annapolis, but it's not working for us. All the way to the point that we can terminate the agreement. So we're not just going to sit statically. We're going to have requirements on what that CEO must produce and expect them to get it done.
A question from James Graham. As of this point, this is the final question, unless anyone else comes up on Zoom. And you've addressed this sort of, but let me ask it again. Do we in fact need a separate USAFA endowment? What problems did we have prior to founding the USAFA Endowment? It goes on to ask, why didn't we choose to have a single CEO a dozen years ago? Why do we need it now?
Yeah, so a dozen years ago, the AOG did fundraising and fundraising. It was in one organization. And when there was that distrust and concern, and the endowment stood up, that caused the split. So the endowment, I truly believe, is a good thing to have. An organization staffed with experts who know how to pull together goals of the Academy and the other nonprofits who also have programs to push for that, and talk to donors about, here's an idea the AOG has. For instance, on the Heritage Trail, we've got a phenomenal Southeast Asia pavilion. Wouldn't it be nice to have a Cold War pavilion and honor what our grads did in the Cold War? Wouldn't it be great to have another one that was a war on terror and honor what our folks did there? So I think it's a great idea to have an organization that's what they're expert at doing, is understanding what the needs are and couching that to donors who may be interested in doing something like that. So I think having a separate endowment full of experts on philanthropy is a good thing.
All right, a little bit of humor here from Aaron Drips. On the lighter side, does your role on the AOG feel like a bad version of the company grade officer council?
Some days, yes.
CK Dexter Haven back with another question. He asks, how is the USAFA Endowment Board elected?
The USAFA Endowment Board is not an elected board. And their bylaws, they have specific guidance on how to be a member, and it's detailed about on donations. So these are grads who have done well for themselves financially, who have decided that they want to continue to serve in two ways, financially and giving of their time and talent. So there are different levels, and again, their donations provide a seat on the board for them so they can have a say and how the endowment is supporting the Academy. And here I'm going to mention again, they're AOG members.
A question that will be near and dear to our CEO, Marty Marcolongo's heart, from WMARI. Any thought of making all graduate members of the AOG upon graduation, like West Point does?
Absolutely, and that's the brainchild of CEO Marty Marcolongo. Yeah. West Point and Navy, they're members when they graduate. Why aren't we? If we can have a more robust philanthropy and build up our endowments, we could spin off the investments from that to make sure we could provide the same services to every graduate, or we could provide tiered services to the graduates. We would absolutely want every graduate to be a member of their Association of Graduates.
There are no more questions, so at this point I believe we will we'll go ahead and conclude. I'd like to thank you for your participation. We hope you found this event useful. Please remember, vote in the upcoming AOG election. Your participation will help set the direction for the AOG for years to come. Good night.